The Price of Silence. Chapter 1. The Secret Begins. Rachel Carter had always been the perfect wife. Or at least that's what everyone thought. She was intelligent, beautiful, and the kind of woman who could balance spreadsheets at her job as a senior accountant at Belridge National Bank while still having dinner ready by 6. But somewhere along the way, the perfection cracked. Her husband, Daniel, was a contractor who built homes for the wealthiest families in Los Angeles. He was a good man. Honest, hardworking, the kind of guy who fixed leaking sinks on Sunday mornings and never forgot their anniversary. But he had one flaw: he trusted too much. Rachel's boss, Jonathan Pierce, was the opposite of Daniel. He was sharp, ambitious, and radiated power. The kind of man who walked into a room and owned it without saying a word. He was married too, though his wife, Victoria, was more of a socialite than a spouse. It started with late nights at the office. First, it was harmless. A shared glance, a lingering touch as he handed her a file. Then came the long dinners after work, the wine-soaked conversations in dimly lit restaurants where their laughter echoed in ways that felt dangerously intimate. Then one evening, when the office was empty and the rain drummed against the windows, Rachel made a choice she could never take back. Chapter 2. The Web Titans. Rachel told herself it was a one-time thing, a mistake, something she could lock away in a box and never open again. But Jonathan wasn't the kind of man to let things be. "I need you, Rachel," he murmured one evening in his office. His hand brushed over hers, and she felt the familiar electricity rush through her veins. She tried to pull away. "This is wrong. I love my husband." Jonathan's lips curved into a knowing smirk. "And yet, you're here." He was right, and the more she tried to stay away, the deeper she fell into his orbit. Until one night, everything changed. A text message. One she never should have sent. One Daniel saw. Chapter 3. The Lies Unravel. It was just a single line. A message that wasn't even meant for Daniel's eyes. "Last night was unforgettable. I can't stop thinking about you." Daniel never confronted her. He didn't rage, didn't break things, didn't even ask questions. Instead, he did something much worse. He started watching. The late-night work calls. The excuses. The way she avoided his touch. Every little thing that never seemed suspicious before suddenly felt like evidence in a trial he hadn't realized he was part of. And then he found out about Jonathan's wife, Victoria. Because Victoria had secrets of her own. Chapter 4. Dangerous Alliances. Victoria Pierce had been married to Jonathan for 10 years, and in that time, she had learned one thing. Never let a man think he's smarter than you. She had suspected her husband's affairs for years, but Rachel was different. This wasn't just sex. This was something Jonathan wanted to keep, and that made Rachel a threat. So when Victoria showed up at Rachel's office, the confrontation wasn't the screaming match Rachel expected. It was something much colder. "I know what you're doing," Victoria said smoothly, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she sipped her espresso. "And I think it's time we had a little chat." Rachel swallowed hard. "Oh, don't bother lying. I have proof. Pictures, texts, bank statements. Jonathan's been sloppy." Rachel's heart pounded. "What do you want?" Victoria smiled, slow and calculating. "I want my husband to pay for what he's done. And I think you're going to help me." Chapter 5. The Game Begins. Meanwhile, Daniel had been making moves of his own. He wasn't just a builder. He was a man who understood how things were put together and how to tear them down. He didn't just want the truth. He wanted revenge. He started meeting with a private investigator, digging into Jonathan's business deals, and what he found was even darker than infidelity. Money laundering. Fraud. A secret offshore account that Jonathan never thought anyone would find. But just as Daniel was preparing to expose it all, he received an anonymous email. A single photo. Rachel and Jonathan, together, in a hotel room. The message below it was simple. "You don't know the whole story. Be careful who you trust." And just like that, the game changed. Chapter 6. No way out. Rachel was trapped. Victoria was threatening her. Daniel was acting strange. Jonathan was getting reckless. And then, there was the anonymous sender. Who else knew? And more importantly, what else did they know? But before she could figure it out, the phone rang. It was Jonathan. His voice was tense. "Rachel, we have a problem." Her breath caught. "What happened?" "They found something. At the bank." "What do you mean?" "They're coming after me. And if I go down, you're coming with me." Chapter 7. A sudden disappearance. Rachel's blood ran cold at Jonathan's words. "They're coming after me. And if I go down, you're coming with me." She gripped the edge of her desk, trying to steady herself. "What are you talking about?" Jonathan's voice was a low whisper. "I don't have time to explain. Just meet me. Tonight. Same hotel." Then he hung up. Rachel's hands trembled as she set the phone down. She wanted to believe this was just another one of Jonathan's manipulations. But something in his voice. He was scared. And Jonathan Pierce was never scared. A knock at her office door made her jump. She turned to see Victoria standing there, a satisfied smirk on her face. "I assume you got the call," Victoria said, stepping inside as if she owned the place. Rachel swallowed. "What do you want now?" Victoria shut the door behind her. "I warned you, didn't I? Jonathan isn't just a liar. He's dangerous. And now he's desperate." She leaned in, her voice sharp as glass. "Do you have any idea what he's capable of?" Rachel's heart pounded. "You keep acting like you're trying to help me, but I don't believe that for a second." Victoria chuckled. "Smart girl. But you don't have a choice." She placed a sleek envelope on Rachel's desk and slid it forward. "Inside, you'll find details about Jonathan's offshore accounts, his secret transactions, things that could destroy him." Rachel stared at it. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because," Victoria said, her voice suddenly ice cold, "you need to decide whose side you're on. Jonathan is a sinking ship, and you don't want to be on board when he goes under." Then she turned and walked out, leaving Rachel alone with the envelope, the weight of her choices pressing down on her like a collapsing building. Chapter 8. A shadow in the dark. That night, Rachel drove to the hotel, her mind racing with possibilities. If she met Jonathan, she could find out what he knew. But if she trusted Victoria, maybe she could save herself. She parked in the underground garage, gripping the envelope Victoria had given her. If Jonathan was truly in trouble, this might be her only leverage. But as she stepped out of the car, she noticed something. A black SUV, tinted windows, engine running, watching. Her pulse spiked. She turned sharply and hurried toward the elevator. But before she could reach it, a voice called out, "Rachel." She spun around. Daniel. He stood by a column, half hidden in the shadows. His face was unreadable, his eyes darker than she had ever seen them. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. "I could ask you the same thing," he said, stepping closer. "Meeting your boss again?" Rachel's breath caught. "Daniel." He shook his head. "Save it." His jaw clenched. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? That I wouldn't follow you?" A cold fear spread through her chest. "You followed me?" Daniel exhaled sharply. "I needed answers. And now I have them." Rachel opened her mouth to respond. But suddenly, the black SUV's door swung open. A man in a suit stepped out. He wasn't just any man. He looked like law enforcement. And he was walking straight toward them. "Rachel Carter?" he asked, pulling out a badge. "FBI. We need to talk." Her world tilted. Daniel stiffened beside her. "What the hell is this?" The agent's face was unreadable. "It's about Jonathan Pierce." Rachel barely had time to react before another voice cut through the air. This one panicked. "Rachel, run! Jonathan!" She turned just in time to see him sprinting out of the stairwell, a wild, desperate look in his eyes. But before she could move, before she could even think, a gunshot echoed through the garage. Jonathan collapsed, blood pooling beneath him, and everything went black. Chapter 9. The Cover-Up. Rachel sat in the police interrogation room, staring at her trembling hands. The events of the night played in her mind like a broken film reel. Jonathan was dead, shot in front of her. The FBI had dragged her in for questioning, but they weren't telling her anything. They wanted answers, answers she didn't have. Finally, the door opened, and the same agent who had approached her in the garage stepped inside. He sat down across from her, his gaze sharp and unreadable. "Rachel," he said carefully, "tell me the truth. How long have you been working with Jonathan Pierce?" Her throat was dry. I wasn't working with him." The agent raised an eyebrow. "Then why was your name linked to one of his offshore accounts?" Her breath caught. "What?" He slid a folder across the table. She hesitated before opening it. Inside were bank statements. Her name, her signature, large sums of money deposited into an account she had never even heard of. She felt the blood drain from her face. "I didn't. Either you were helping him," the agent said, leaning in, "or you were being set up." Rachel's mind reeled. This wasn't just an affair anymore. This was something bigger, something far worse. And someone, either Jonathan before he died or someone even more powerful, had made sure that if he went down, she would go down with him. Chapter 10. The Real Enemy. Hours later, Rachel was released, but nothing felt real. Daniel was waiting for her outside the station. He didn't say a word, just opened the car door. As they drove in silence, she could feel the weight of everything pressing down on them. Finally, she whispered, "Do you believe me?" Daniel gripped the steering wheel. His knuckles were white. "I don't know." Rachel looked away, her throat tightening. Then her phone buzzed. An unknown number. With shaking hands, she opened the message. "You're in over your head, but I can help you. Meet me at the docks. Midnight. Come alone." Rachel's heart pounded. Whoever this was, they weren't finished yet. Chapter 11. A Meeting in the Shadows. Rachel sat in the passenger seat, gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. The message was clear. Someone knew more than they were letting on. And if she wanted to survive this, she needed answers. Daniel hadn't spoken since they left the station, but she could feel the weight of his suspicion thick in the air. He didn't trust her. Maybe he never would again. Finally, he broke the silence. "Where are we going?" Rachel hesitated. If she told him about the message, he might try to stop her. But if she went alone, she could be walking into a trap. She turned to him, searching his face. "Daniel? Do you still love me?" His grip tightened on the wheel. He didn't answer right away. Then, his voice came, low and filled with something she couldn't quite place. "I don't know who you are anymore." The words hit harder than she expected. She looked away, blinking back tears. "Drop me off at the house," she murmured. "I need time to think." Daniel nodded, but his eyes stayed on the road. Silent, distant. Chapter 12. The Docks. Midnight came fast. Rachel parked a few blocks away and made her way to the docks on foot. The air was thick with fog, and the only sound was the distant crashing of waves against the wooden planks. A single figure stood under the glow of a flickering street lamp. Rachel's heart pounded as she approached. "You sent the message?" The figure turned. "Victoria." Rachel froze. "You?" Victoria crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "You're in trouble, Rachel. And if you don't start listening, you won't make it out of this alive." Rachel clenched her jaw. "You're the one who gave me those documents. And now Jonathan is dead. The FBI thinks I was working with him. What the hell is going on?" Victoria exhaled sharply, glancing over her shoulder before stepping closer. Jonathan was into things far worse than an affair. Money laundering, fraud, offshore accounts, that's just the surface. But the real problem, she lowered her voice. He wasn't working alone. Rachel's stomach twisted. "Who?" Victoria hesitated, then finally said, "People who don't leave loose ends." The words sent a chill down Rachel's spine. "You're telling me someone..." A gunshot. Rachel ducked as Victoria gasped, clutching her shoulder. Blood bloomed through her coat. "Run!" Victoria hissed. Rachel didn't think, she just moved. She sprinted down the docks, her heart hammering in her chest as another shot rang out behind her. She didn't look back. She ran until she hit the streets, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her phone buzzed. A new message. "You were warned." Next time, you won't be so lucky. Chapter 13, Buried Truths. Rachel burst through the front door of her house, locking it behind her. Her mind raced. Whoever shot at them wasn't playing games. This wasn't about an affair anymore. Daniel stood in the living room, staring at her. His expression darkened when he saw the fear in her eyes. What happened? Rachel hesitated. I was followed. His jaw clenched. By who? I don't know. She swallowed hard. Daniel, listen to me. I think Jonathan was involved in something bigger. The FBI thinks I was part of it. And now someone tried to kill me. Daniel stared at her for a long moment. Then he walked past her, locking the door, checking the windows. When he turned back, his expression was unreadable. We're leaving, he said. Rachel blinked. What? We can't stay here. If what you're saying is true, they'll come for you. And if they think I know anything, they'll come for me too. Rachel shook her head. We can't just. Daniel grabbed her shoulders, his grip firm but not unkind. Rachel, listen to me. I may not trust you right now, but I'm not going to let you die. For the first time in days, she felt something close to safety. Then the power went out. The house plunged into darkness. A second later, a car pulled up outside, headlights off. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. They found us. Daniel didn't hesitate. He grabbed her hand. We're leaving. Now. They bolted for the back door, slipping into the night as shadows moved toward the house. And just like that, Rachel Carter's life as she knew it was over. Chapter 14. No Safe Place. Rachel's breath came in short gasps as she and Daniel sprinted through the neighbor's backyard, ducking behind a row of tall hedges. Behind them, the house stood in darkness, but she knew they weren't alone. A car door creaked open. Footsteps. Slow. Methodical. Rachel clutched Daniel's arm, her nails digging into his jacket. He held a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. Then, a voice. Male. Low. Dangerous. She's not here, the man muttered. Check the back. Rachel's pulse pounded in her ears. Daniel leaned in, whispering so softly she barely heard him. We can't stay here. Follow me. He led her through the side gate and into the street. Their car was parked just a block away, hidden under the cover of trees. Daniel didn't hesitate. He shoved the key into the ignition, and the engine roared to life. The second they pulled away, headlights flicked on behind them. They're following us, Rachel whispered. Daniel's grip tightened on the wheel. I know. He pressed the gas. The car lurched forward, speeding down the empty suburban streets. The vehicle behind them picked up speed, staying close. Too close. Daniel! I see it! He muttered, swerving hard onto a side road. The other car followed. Rachel's heart slammed against her ribs. They're not giving up. Daniel's jaw clenched. Then neither are we. With one swift motion, he jerked the wheel and cut across a parking lot, the tires screeching as he maneuvered through the maze of alleyways behind a row of closed stores. Rachel turned back. The car was gone. For now. Chapter 15. A cryptic warning. They didn't stop driving until they were nearly an hour outside the city. Daniel pulled into a deserted rest stop, killing the engine. Rachel exhaled shakily. What now? Daniel turned to her, his expression unreadable. You tell me. Rachel frowned. What do you mean? Daniel leaned back, crossing his arms. Someone tried to kill you. They might try again. So tell me. Rachel, what aren't you saying? Rachel shook her head. I told you everything. Did you? Daniel's eyes darkened. Because from where I'm sitting, this started as an affair, then turned into money laundering, and now people are trying to kill you. And somehow, you expect me to believe you were just an innocent bystander. Rachel swallowed hard. I never wanted this. Daniel didn't break eye contact. Then start talking. Because if we're going to survive this, I need the truth. Rachel took a slow breath. Jonathan said someone was coming for him. He wanted me to meet him that night. Then he got shot before he could tell me who. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. And you have no idea who they are? Rachel hesitated. because there was one name she hadn't spoken aloud yet. Victoria. The envelope. The secrets she had fed Rachel. The way she showed up at the docks, knowing exactly what was happening. Could she be behind it? Or worse? Was she just another pawn? Before Rachel could answer, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. With shaking hands, she opened the message. You're asking the wrong questions. Come alone. 4 a.m. Storage Unit 17. No Daniel. Or he dies. Rachel's stomach dropped. Daniel leaned over, reading the message. His face darkened. No way in hell you're going alone. But Rachel knew. She didn't have a choice. Chapter 16. The Deal with the Devil. 4 a.m. The storage facility was abandoned. The metal units lined up like silent sentinels in the dim glow of flickering streetlights. Rachel's breath was shallow as she stepped through the gate, her heart hammering with each step toward Unit 17. She wasn't alone. A figure leaned against the metal door. Rachel's pulse spiked. It wasn't Victoria. It wasn't even one of the men from the night before. It was Harrison Lane, Jonathan's former business partner, and one of the most ruthless men in the city. Rachel's hands clenched into fists. You? Harrison smirked. Disappointed. What do you want? She demanded. His expression turned serious. To keep you alive. Rachel let out a humorless laugh. You're joking, right? People are trying to kill me because of Jonathan's mess. And now, suddenly, you're my guardian angel. Harrison took a step closer. Jonathan was reckless. He made enemies with the wrong people. But you're useful. Rachel stiffened. Useful how? Harrison pulled out a flash drive and dangled it between his fingers. Jonathan kept secrets. A lot of them. Bank records. Account numbers. Names. And guess who has the key to it all? Rachel's stomach twisted. Me. Harrison nodded. You were his accountant. Which means whether you like it or not, you're part of this. Rachel's throat tightened. And if I say no? Harrison's smirk returned. Then I hope you said goodbye to Daniel. Her blood ran cold. He tucked the flash drive into her coat pocket. You have 24 hours. Either you work with me, or you both die. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Rachel stood frozen, the weight of the flash drive heavy against her chest. There was no way out, unless she found one herself. Chapter 17. The Weight of Secrets. Rachel gripped the flash drive in her pocket as she walked back to the car. Her mind raced. Harrison Lane wasn't just some businessman caught in Jonathan's mess. He was a predator, and now he had her trapped in his game. Daniel was waiting for her, pacing near the car. The second he saw her, his face darkened. What the hell happened? He demanded. Rachel hesitated. Could she trust him? Before she could answer, he grabbed her arms, his grip tight. Rachel, don't lie to me. She slowly pulled the flash drive from her pocket and placed it in his hand. Harrison Lane found me. Daniel's expression turned to steel. Harrison? Jonathan's old partner? The guy with ties to the... He stopped himself. Rachel caught it. To what, Daniel? Daniel exhaled sharply and looked away. And in that moment, she knew he wasn't telling her everything either. Daniel, she said carefully. What aren't you telling me? He hesitated for only a second before he muttered. Harrison's not just Jonathan's old partner. He's connected to people who clean up messes. Big ones. Rachel's stomach dropped. You mean? Daniel nodded. Organized crime. The kind that doesn't leave witnesses. Her hands trembled. Harrison had given her 24 hours. She had to figure out what was on that flash drive, and how to survive whatever came next. Chapter 18. The Flash Drive. They found an old roadside motel outside the city, somewhere off the grid. Daniel sat near the window, watching the parking lot, while Rachel opened her laptop and plugged in the flash drive. A single folder popped up. Project Nightfall. Rachel clicked on it. Bank statements, wire transfers, offshore accounts. And then pictures. She scrolled through them, her breath catching. Jonathan. Victoria. Harrison. A group of men she didn't recognize. But then, her stomach turned to ice. Picture of herself. taken from across the street. Outside her office, Daniel leaned over, his face hard. They've been watching you for a long time. Rachel swallowed, her pulse racing. What is this? She scrolled further. One final file. She clicked it. A video. The screen flickered to life. Jonathan Pierce, sitting in a dimly lit office. His face was bruised. He looked scared, terrified. And then he spoke. If you're watching this, I'm dead. Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. Daniel went rigid. Keep playing it. Jonathan's voice was strained. I made a mistake. I thought I could outsmart them. I was wrong. Harrison, he's not the real threat. There's someone else. Someone bigger. And Rachel, if they find out you have this, he stopped, looked over his shoulder. His breath quickened. I tried to protect you, but it's too late. Run. The screen cut to black. Rachel's body went cold. Daniel cursed under his breath. This is bad. Rachel turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. Who was Jonathan talking about? Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to, because her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. One new message. You have 20 hours left. Stop digging. Or you and Daniel both die. Rachel's hands shook. She looked at Daniel. What do we do? He didn't hesitate. We find out who's really behind this. Chapter 19. The Betrayal. They needed help. Rachel thought of one person, Victoria. She knew more than she had let on. And if she wasn't dead yet, it meant she was still valuable to someone. Daniel wasn't convinced. You really think she's on our side? Rachel sighed. I don't trust her. But she's the only person left who might know what we're up against. So they took a risk. Victoria's penthouse was in the heart of downtown. Getting in wasn't hard. Daniel picked the lock within seconds. Inside, the apartment was eerily quiet. No sign of Victoria. No sign of a struggle. Rachel's gut twisted. Something was wrong. Then she saw it. A glass of wine, still half full, sitting on the marble counter. The faint scent of perfume in the air. Victoria had been here. Recently. Daniel moved toward the bedroom, gun drawn. Stay close. Rachel followed. The door was ajar. Inside, the covers were pulled back, as if someone had just gotten out of bed. And then, a sound. Rachel spun around just as Victoria stepped out of the shadows, a gun in her hand. Rachel's breath caught. Victoria. Victoria smirked. You shouldn't have come here. Daniel tensed, raising his own weapon. Drop it. Victoria tilted her head, almost amused. Oh, Daniel. You really think I'd be this careless? A click. Rachel's stomach dropped as she realized Victoria wasn't alone. A second figure emerged from the hallway. Harrison, smiling like the devil himself. Rachel's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a trap. It was a betrayal. Chapter 20. No Way Out. Rachel barely had time to react before Harrison's men stepped into the room, guns raised. Daniel's jaw clenched. What's this about, Lane? Harrison chuckled. Come on, Carter. You really think you were going to win this? You and your wife have been playing a game you don't even understand. Rachel's mind spun. Jonathan was onto something. He said there was someone bigger. Harrison's smile faded. You don't need to worry about that anymore. Victoria took a step forward, gun still aimed at Rachel's chest. I told you before, sweetheart. You were useful. But now, she sighed. You're a liability. Rachel's throat tightened. You set me up. Victoria smirked. You set yourself up the moment you climbed into bed with my husband. Daniel stiffened. Rachel felt a sharp wave of nausea. Harrison checked his watch. You've got two choices. Hand over the flash drive and disappear, or we put a bullet in both of you right now. Rachel's mind raced. She looked at Daniel. He was watching her carefully, his fingers twitching slightly, almost imperceptibly. Then she understood. They weren't done yet. This wasn't over. She exhaled, looked straight into Harrison's eyes, and smiled. I hope you're ready, she murmured. Then, a sudden movement, a gunshot, chaos. And Rachel ran. Chapter 21. The Man in the Shadows. Rachel barely had time to react. The gunshot rang through the penthouse, shattering the glass table between them. Daniel tackled her to the ground as chaos erupted. Victoria cursed, diving for cover. Harrison barked an order, but his men were already moving. Too late to stop what was coming. Because Rachel wasn't the only one in danger tonight. Another gunshot, this one closer, and then silence. Rachel dared to lift her head, her breath shallow. Harrison was gone. Victoria was bleeding, clutching her arm. And standing in the doorway was a man she had never seen before. Tall, clean-cut, dressed in an expensive suit, holding a silenced pistol like it was an extension of his arm. His voice was calm, controlled. "Mrs. Carter, we need to talk." Rachel's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about Jonathan anymore. This was something bigger. Chapter 22. The True Power. The man introduced himself as Marcus Vale. Rachel had never heard of him, but the way Victoria's face drained of color told her everything she needed to know. Daniel stiffened beside her. "Who the hell are you?" Marcus gave a small, polite smile. "The man who's been cleaning up Jonathan Pierce's mess." He tilted his head. "And now yours." Rachel's fingers twitched. "Jonathan," he said, "there was someone bigger. Someone pulling the strings." Marcus sighed, almost amused. Jonathan always had a flair for the dramatic. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "But yes, he wasn't lying." Rachel swallowed. "And you?" Marcus met her gaze. "I represent the people who actually run things." The weight of those words settled in her stomach like a stone. This wasn't just a corporate scandal. This wasn't just fraud or money laundering. This was about power. Real power. And she had just stumbled into the center of it. Chapter 23. The Offer. Marcus took a seat, completely at ease despite the gunfire that had just torn through the room. "I assume you've seen the contents of the flash drive." Rachel nodded slowly. "Enough to know I'm in trouble." Marcus smiled. "That depends." Daniel's voice was tight. "On what?" Marcus studied Rachel. "On whether you're smart enough to accept my offer." Rachel's pulse quickened. "What offer?" Marcus leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "You're an accountant, Rachel. A very good one. You understand numbers. Offshore accounts. How money moves." Rachel's throat went dry. Marcus continued. "Jonathan was reckless. He stole from the wrong people. But you," he smiled again. "You're different. You still have value." Daniel tensed. "You want her to work for you." Marcus shrugged. "Call it a mutually beneficial arrangement." Rachel's mind raced. This was insane. She had been running for her life, and now the people chasing her were offering her a seat at the table? Daniel grabbed her arm, voice low and urgent. "Rachel, don't." But Marcus wasn't finished. "Of course," he mused. "You're free to say no." He stood, adjusting his suit. "But understand this, if you refuse, you don't just disappear." His eyes flicked to Daniel. "Everyone you love disappears." Rachel's heart pounded. She wasn't being given a choice. She was being given a sentence. Chapter 24. The Crossroads. The drive back to the motel was silent. Daniel stared at the road, his jaw clenched. Rachel stared at the flash drive in her hands, the weight of it suffocating. Finally, Daniel spoke. "We run." Rachel blinked. "What?" "We pack up, change our names, disappear." His knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. "We don't play their game." Rachel exhaled shakily. "And if we can't run?" Daniel's grip faltered, because they both knew the truth. Marcus wasn't a man who gave second chances. Rachel closed her eyes. She had 24 hours to decide. Stay, work for them, lose herself, or run, and risk losing everything. Chapter 25. A Dangerous Decision. Rachel sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the flash drive in her hands. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made her skin prickle. Daniel paced near the window, his silhouette sharp against the dim light. "We can't take this deal, Rachel." She exhaled shakily. "And if we run, they'll find us." Daniel turned, his eyes dark. "So what?" You just become one of them. Rachel clenched her jaw. I don't know. Silence stretched between them. Then, a soft knock at the door. Both of them froze. Daniel pulled his gun. Rachel's heart pounded. Another knock. Then, a voice. It's me. Rachel's blood ran cold. Victoria. Chapter 26. The Last Warning. Daniel opened the door just enough to see her. Victoria looked pale, her arm still bandaged from the gunshot. Her designer coat was speckled with rain. You shouldn't be here, Daniel growled. Victoria smirked. Neither should you. Rachel stepped forward. What do you want? Victoria sighed and pushed inside, locking the door behind her. I came to warn you. Rachel folded her arms. About Marcus? Victoria shook her head. About what happens if you say yes. Rachel's stomach twisted. I don't have a choice. Victoria's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. There's always a choice, sweetheart. But you need to know the truth. Rachel swallowed hard. Then start talking. Victoria hesitated, just for a second. Then, she leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. Marcus doesn't recruit people. He erases them. Rachel's breath hitched. What do you mean? Victoria exhaled. The second you say yes, you stop being Rachel Carter. They rewrite your identity. Your past, your records, everything. You'll belong to them. And once you do... She shook her head. There's no getting out. Daniel stiffened. Then how the hell do we stop them? Victoria gave a humorless laugh. You don't. Rachel clenched her fists. You wouldn't be here if you didn't have an angle. Victoria's expression shifted. Marcus isn't the top of the food chain. There's someone above him. Someone who wanted Jonathan dead. Rachel's pulse quickened. Who? Victoria's gaze flicked to the window, as if she could feel unseen eyes watching. Then, she whispered, the architect. The name sent a shiver down Rachel's spine. Daniel frowned. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Victoria leaned closer. No one knows who he is. No photos. No records. But he runs everything, politicians, CEOs, entire industries. Jonathan got greedy. He thought he could outmaneuver him. She scoffed. Look how that turned out. Rachel's throat tightened. And now, Marcus wants me to replace him. Victoria nodded. Because you're useful. But the moment you stop being useful. She drew her finger across her throat. Rachel's breath came faster. So what do I do? Victoria smiled, a dangerous, knowing smile. You do what Jonathan couldn't. She leaned in, voice dripping with deadly intent. You take the architect down. Chapter 27. A plan that could kill them all. The room fell into stunned silence. Daniel shook his head. You're insane. Victoria raised a brow. Am I? Rachel's mind spun. You expect me to go up against a man who doesn't exist? Victoria's smirk widened. He exists. You just need to know where to look. Rachel swallowed hard. And you do. Victoria took out her phone and tossed it onto the table. A single file was open. Rachel's stomach flipped when she saw the name. Avery Calloway, CEO, billionaire, philanthropist, and Jonathan's biggest investor. Daniel ran a hand over his face. You're saying Calloway is the architect? Victoria tapped the screen. Not officially, but his fingerprints are on every major financial crime in the last decade. Offshore shell companies, black market trading, assassinations disguised as accidents. She met Rachel's eyes. Marcus is just a middleman. Calloway is the one pulling the strings. Rachel exhaled sharply. If this was true, she wasn't just caught in a corporate conspiracy. She was standing at the gates of a shadow empire. And Marcus had just invited her inside. Chapter 28. The Countermove. Rachel paced the room, her thoughts racing. Victoria's plan was madness. Going against Marcus was suicide. Going against the architect. Unthinkable. And yet, Jonathan had tried to outmaneuver them and failed. But what if Rachel didn't outmaneuver them? What if she played their game better? She turned to Victoria. If we do this, we need leverage. Something Calloway can't erase. Victoria smirked. Already ahead of you. She tapped her phone again, pulling up another file. Rachel's breath caught. A transaction record. Millions of dollars. Hidden under layers of fake companies. And at the bottom, Calloway's personal signature. Daniel's eyes widened. This is enough to ruin him. Victoria chuckled. Sweetheart. This is enough to burn him alive. Rachel met Daniel's gaze. We have 24 hours to decide. Daniel's jaw tightened. Decide what? Rachel's fingers curled into fists. If we run, or if we take Calloway down. Daniel hesitated. And if we lose? Rachel exhaled slowly. Then we don't get a second chance. Silence settled over the room. Then, Rachel's phone buzzed. One new message. Time's up. Give us your answer. Now. Rachel closed her eyes. She already knew what she had to do. She turned to Victoria. How do we bring down a ghost? Victoria grinned. First, we make him think we work for him. Rachel exhaled. And then, Victoria's smile sharpened. We make him regret ever letting us in. Chapter 29. The first move. Rachel took a slow breath, steadying herself. She had made her choice. She would play the game, but on her terms. Victoria handed her a sleek, burner phone. Call Marcus. Tell him you're in. Daniel stiffened. Rachel, are you sure about this? Rachel met his gaze. If we run, they hunt us down. If we fight from the outside, we lose. But if we get inside, she exhaled, we can burn it all to the ground. Daniel hesitated. Then finally he nodded. Rachel dialed the number. Marcus answered on the first ring. Mrs. Carter. His voice was smooth, unreadable. I assume you've come to a decision. Rachel forced calm into her voice. I'm in. A beat of silence. Then, smart girl. Rachel tightened her grip on the phone. But I have conditions. Marcus chuckled. Do you now? If I work for you, I work alone. No babysitters, no surveillance. She paused. And I want to meet him. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Marcus said, That's not how this works. Rachel smirked. Then I walk. A tense pause. Then, unexpectedly, Marcus laughed. Jonathan underestimated you, he murmured. Fine. You'll meet him. Rachel's pulse pounded. She had just secured an audience with Avery Calloway, the most dangerous man in the world. Chapter 30. The Architect. The meeting was set. Private estate outside the city. Guarded. Secure. Untouchable. Rachel arrived alone as agreed. She stepped out of the car, her heart pounding. A tall man stood on the balcony, watching her approach. His suit was crisp, his demeanor effortless. Avery Calloway. As she stepped inside, his piercing blue eyes locked onto her. He smiled. You must be Rachel Carter. She swallowed. And you must be the architect. Calloway chuckled. Marcus says you're special. He gestured for her to sit. Let's see if he's right. Rachel sat, keeping her composure. Jonathan was reckless. I'm not. Calloway leaned back. Good. I don't tolerate mistakes. Rachel met his gaze. Neither do I. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. Tell me, Rachel, why do you really want to be here? Rachel's heart pounded. This was it. The moment she could plant the seed of his downfall. She leaned in. I want power. Calloway studied her. Then he smiled. And just like that, she was in. Chapter 31. The Double Cross. Over the next few weeks, Rachel played her role perfectly. She worked inside Calloway's empire, gaining his trust, earning access to his deepest secrets. And all the while, she and Victoria were quietly dismantling him from within. Victoria's job? Leak key financial records to trusted journalists. Daniel's job? Coordinate with a rogue FBI agent willing to take Calloway down. Rachel's job? Make Calloway believe she was his most loyal asset, until the final moment. And then, everything unraveled. Chapter 32. Checkmate. Calloway sat in his office, sipping whiskey, when Rachel entered. Ah, he said smoothly. Just the woman I wanted to see. Rachel smiled. What's the occasion? Calloway set down his glass. We have a problem. Rachel's stomach twisted. What kind of problem? Calloway leaned forward, eyes sharp. Someone's been leaking information. Rachel forced a calm nod. Any suspects? Calloway smirked. Just one. Before she could react, Marcus stepped into the room behind her. Gun in hand. Rachel's pulse spiked. They knew. Calloway shook his head. I liked you, Rachel. I really did. He sighed. Such a shame. Marcus cocked the gun. Rachel exhaled. Then it's a good thing, she murmured. I was always one step ahead. Calloway frowned. Then his phone buzzed. One new email. From Rachel Carter. He clicked it. His face drained of color. The files were all there. Transactions. Offshore accounts. Proof of everything. And the email? CC'd to every major news agency, FBI division, and federal prosecutor in the country. Rachel smiled. Checkmate. Before Calloway could react, gunshots exploded outside. Daniel, Victoria, the FBI, they had come to finish the job. Chapter 33. The Fall of the Architect. Calloway tried to run, but there was nowhere left to go. The moment he stepped outside, FBI agents swarmed the estate. Helicopters overhead. Lights flashing. He turned to Rachel, eyes burning with rage. You have no idea what you've done. Rachel smiled. Oh, I know exactly what I've done. Marcus tried to fight, tried to pull his gun, but Victoria shot him first. Rachel didn't even flinch as Marcus fell. Calloway was taken in cuffs. And just like that, the empire crumbled. Chapter 34. The Aftermath. A week later, Rachel sat in a quiet cafe, stirring her coffee. Victoria slid into the seat across from her, smirking. So, we actually did it. Rachel exhaled. Yeah. Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. And now what? Rachel glanced out the window, watching the city move on as if nothing had happened. They had won, but at a cost. Jonathan was dead. Harrison was dead. And the world was still just as corrupt as before. Victoria sighed. You know, Calloway wasn't the only one. Rachel raised a brow. Meaning? Victoria sipped her espresso. There's always another monster in the shadows. Rachel smirked. Then I guess we know what to do. Daniel exhaled. Rachel. She turned to him. We didn't just survive, Daniel. We won. She met Victoria's gaze. So let's keep winning. Victoria grinned. And just like that, a new game began.